Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to WyomingPBS.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Truly, the water is the lifeblood of Yellowstone. The rivers, and when they culminate at a waterfall, it's just this magical spot that you want to go see.
It was the roar and the thunder of the water and the colors that permeated through the sun. It was almost like a prism where you'd see all these colors. And that stuck with me.
This was a volcano, one of the greatest volcanoes on Earth. And it spewed out mountains of lava. And when you combine all those precipices, those mounds of lava, with thousands of cold springs that break out naturally within that lava, you get waterfalls, big ones, and lots of them.
Native cultures had a very complex relationship with water. There's a spiritual aspect.
Waterfalls in Yellowstone are significant because they represent an ecosystem, a natural system, and they are an indicator to us of the health of the ecosystem.
Land is, by definition, static. But the water is constantly flowing. It literally gives a kind of metaphorical sense of dynamism, emotional energy. Somehow waterfalls give a sense of that change and nuance that creates a deeper level of meaning to a landscape painting.
I decided right then that I wanted to be the first artist to paint these. I had the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm Mike Poulsen, and welcome to my studio.
Yellowstone Forever is proud to support Painting the Falls of Yellowstone. Yellowstone Forever is the official educational and philanthropic partner of Yellowstone National Park. Help preserve the world's first national park for generations to come. For more information, visit yellowstone.org. Additional funding provided by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. By Rocky Mountain Power, a division of Pacificor, and supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Arts Council through funding from the Wyoming State Legislature. By Black Hills Energy, improving life with energy. And by the members of Wyoming PBS. Thank you for your support.
Ever since non-natives first explored the Yellowstone Plateau early in the 19th century, they've tried to bring its indescribable wonders back to the civilized world with articles, with sketch pads, with cameras, and with canvases. Now, a Wyoming painter has embarked on a project to paint the waterfalls of Yellowstone, including some in the backcountry that are rarely seen.
I've been involved in this project for 6.5 years, and I am still amazed at the amount of material that is out there. Most people that roll through the park and see its features unfortunately don't get to see a lot of what is offered in the backcountry. Well, a lot of these waterfalls in the backcountry that have been discovered, from 250 to 300 waterfalls, and then some. Let me take you to a little walkthrough on what the process involves. It's hiking to the location or riding, taking horses, or whichever way we get to the location. I like to start with working up pencil sketches. That enables me to get the right composition, the more things that I can recognize when I'm there is so much easier to paint as you become familiar with them. I noticed that there were some specific points on the waterfalls here at Lost Falls that I had to go back because I didn't have enough material. And so it's good that I get a lot of comprehensive material, live sketches, and then I work from a pencil sketch and do variations on that. And then I'll work that up in composing figures, animals in it, and I'll do a workup oil sketch. This will give me my color scheme that I want to use at that particular falls. And that may be dictated by the color of the rock, the amount of vegetation is in a particular waterfall area. All of those things kind of dictate my color scheme. And because I want to stay fairly truthful with these, but yet bring out the best of every waterfall, because each waterfall is so different and has a wonderful energy.
What you get with waterfalls is a different experience each time. It's how close you can get to them. If you can be at the base of a waterfalls where you're catching all the steam coming off the water vapor, I mean, there's a lot of ions in that, and they're positively charged, and I think you can instantly become in a good mood by being at the base of waterfalls.
It's hard to explain the excitement and the energy that you have at these waterfalls. You're up close, and oftentimes I can feel the spray of the water, and the beauty of each waterfall being so specific to its area. The rock formations, the type of rock, the plants. And as I begin working up my oil sketches, and I determine the content at that point, as I work up these sketches, everything is part of it. The flora and fauna, everything becomes necessary. The types of plants that you would have in this area at this time of year. I want them to do specific to the times of year that we are at the waterfalls. I also want to do some winter waterfalls where there is enough volume to carry water and to create the ice formations that go along with the winter. There's ecosystems in the park where there's no snow. Basically, they have their own ecosystem. The ground's too hot, of course, for the snow to sit on there anyway. So when it does fall, still there's ferns there. You're going to find certain orchids in some of these areas. Landscapes, I think you can be too literal, but it's been done before. People have copied them just as they see them or as they photographed them. It just depends on you as an artist. It's very personal, and everybody has their own ideas to what they would like it to look like. So what I'm going to do here, since I've just hit this with retouch varnish, I'm gonna take out this Indian here because I'm gonna actually put a grouping here and probably add one more figure up in here. And then I'm gonna add probably up in here, this is gonna be changed a little bit. I'm gonna go back to my original drawing only because I like the composition and the simplicity of it. I'll tighten these areas up here by placing the rocks closer together because I don't want it too heavy in this area. If you look at this sketch here, I want to consolidate these figures as a whole and to make them part of the whole scene here. I had the opportunity of a lifetime. I just happened to be at the Buffalo Bills Historical Center when three young men who had co-authored a book called Yellowstone Waterfalls, and they were giving their talks, so I decided to sit in on it. I thought it might be interesting. I decided while I was sitting there listening to these gentlemen talk about the waterfalls and showing slides that are in the backcountry of Yellowstone, and I decided right then that I wanted to be the first artist to paint these.
The three men working on a book about Yellowstone waterfalls were Paul Rubenstein, Mike Stevens, and Lee Whittlesey, a historian who has written several books about Yellowstone.
It's a little bit of a story. We got together back in about 1990, the three of us. We had sort of, put our heads together and decided, well, someone needs to do a real complete book about the waterfalls of Yellowstone. And there were at that time about 50 along the roadsides that were well known. And we all figured that that was what the book would mainly be about, those 50. And Paul said at that time, we might get lucky and discover as many as 5 new waterfalls. And it turned out over a decade of hiking with them and with many other people and doing all the research that was involved that we found 250 or so waterfalls for the book that was finally published. And after that, we've added around 75 others.
I think I was right at the right time of my life to where I'd really honed my style. I was confident, I am confident in my painting. And to be able to paint these waterfalls, it almost seems like I've been honing my craft for all these years to really get into something that now I can produce something that I feel will be worthwhile to the entire world.
There's some high percentage of Yellowstone visitors, it's in the high 90s somewhere, that really don't move out of the developed areas. By that I mean they don't get off the roads. They may take a short hike or go on the boardwalks, but do they really actually step foot into the wilderness? Almost none of them do. I can go into the wilderness and I can explore some of these places, never run into a person out there at all, and find true wilderness in this national park that's visited by 4 million people. I like to be there just for the destination of finding something out in the wilderness. Or something I discover that I didn't know was there. And waterfalls are often that thing.
This is a very big park. It's 2/3 the size of the state of Connecticut. And with the road system only covering about 1% and the trails just a tiny bit more, that's a lot of space to have to try to cover if you want to do justice to finding these features. Tallest along the roads that was known was the 308-foot tall lower falls of the Yellowstone River. But we found one that was in the backcountry that was, 450 some feet tall. And another one that if you added its cascades in, was taller than that. In the 600, 700, 800 foot range, depending on how much vertical you count and how much was just cascades. Cascades are nearly vertical themselves. So that particular falls, called the Silver Cord Cascade, is really very, very tall. In my opinion, likely to have been the waterfall that Meriwether Lewis heard of, maybe from Indians. He wrote of mythical falls in the mountains that were 1,000 feet tall. I suspect that Silver Cord Cascade was the one. There aren't many that anywhere in the Rockies that approach that height.
Yellowstone really has this untold resource. It's got so much area that's untouched, that there's no roads, there's no trails to them in a lot of cases.
Yellowstone is so large, you still would have had to go searching, up canyons and over hill and dale, and great distances. So we were, overwhelmed after the first summer. We knew it was big, and we wondered if we'd live long enough.
If you have this sense that you're discovering it maybe for the first time, it seems to be a deeper experience associated with that. Years ago, quite by accident, we discovered a very special cascade or a waterfall that's really so special that I call it the Fountain of Youth. It's because every time I visit there, it seems to add another year or two onto my life. That's the secrets that I think people are charged to keep if they really find that very, very magical place, like the Fountain of Youth.
Yes, there are secrets that I'll leave behind that I'll keep in my journal. Yeah, I'm concerned at times because my first show is 2021 on this project, and there are a lot of paintings to do. Can I handle this? and having had cancer, a very serious form of cancer, yeah, I think they'll creep in occasionally, but I look at it this way. I have a family to support. And I get to do something the only thing was my concern for my family. Yeah. I think it's something that I'm here for. It's something that happened for a reason. You have this connection with water, which is water is life, and water is part of all of us. Without it, we wouldn't exist. And that connection has stayed with me all my life. The energy of water and what it means to our well-being. It has a vibratory essence. I was there at the right place at the right time. And to have this opportunity to work with waterfalls, it's icing on the cake. After being at Union Falls, if it wasn't on your bucket list, it definitely will be at the top of your bucket list. You're looking at a 300+ foot falls, and then it flows down to another falls down below. Being there in the moment, the energy and the amount of water, because 2 tributaries are heading right over the precipice of this falls. So it has sculpted this beautiful canyon lined by moss and trees that is, in particular, unique to that area. It flows right off of the plateau.
That corner of the park is the southwest corner. It is named Cascade Corner because it's renowned for its great number of waterfalls. And indeed, there were at least 25 on the maps before we started our project. And they were named and mapped. And we added fully 50 to the Cascade Corner down there. That is just a massively rich area for waterfalls.
This is a preliminary sketch of Union Falls that I want to create for a grand entrance to the show. This is tabled to be 10 feet by 7 feet because I think it's one of the more fantastic falls and sculpted falls that I've ever seen in my life. To show scale, you can see here where I've have penciled in figures here to kind of give it scale. This is what I think is probably the most spectacular falls in the park next to the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. My dad had bought a ranch out here about 20 miles southwest of Cody, Wyoming. And we started coming out and he told us to make sure we start saving up our money because you're going to need a horse. And so I bought my own horse, my saddle, a saddle blanket, and bridle and halter for I think $150. I could call Cecil, who was our foreman, and his wife Joanne, and have him check on my horse and make sure that everything was doing good. Probably got really tired of me bugging him. Talk about daydreaming. When I went back east, I didn't ever want to leave. My mind was out here 24/7. When I was small, probably 6, 7 years old, my mother had a coffee shop in Akron, Ohio, and directly across the street from the coffee shop was the Akron Art Institute, which would be my sometimes babysitter. And oftentimes they'd just give me pencils and crayons, paper, and tell me to go sit down somewhere and draw something. I've never thought about ever doing anything else. Never wanted to be a fireman or a policeman or anything else. I just wanted to be an artist. Moved here permanently when I was 13. So I've been here ever since, with the exception of a stint in the Marine Corps and some classes at ASU before my dad was killed in a hunting accident. Then I returned home to the ranch, the family ranch, to help out. I've always wanted to have this place up in the mountains, and it offers me everything that I need as an artist. I just had an affinity for the woods. I love to hike and discover the Indian culture because there are so many things that related to the Indian culture on our ranch. There's just so much out here, and you just never tire of it. This is what I call home.
The pre-European Indian cultures that were up in the Yellowstone Plateau were not necessarily persons who were just traveling through, hunting buffalo, things like that. They were staying year-round. We know that from things that were left behind. Different obsidian points, campsites, all types of basketry, cordage.
I've tried to think what the Indians would have done in some of these areas. I've found lots of points, scrapers, areas where the Indians have camped. There are a lot of teepee rings located out here. And the great thing about this is I'll be able to put Indians in situations at these falls as I would envision it. Be able to tell stories about the Indians' involvement in Yellowstone, since they've been there longer than any of us.
Only recently have archaeologists begun unearthing ancient evidence of Native American presence year-round at high altitudes in the greater Yellowstone area.
The park was established in 1872, and the idea that it was a wilderness before that is one of the myths we've created. It was all these tribes were using that area over and over and over again in a diverse set of ways for long periods of time. You'd have had Shoshone, Bannock, Crow, Blackfeet, a whole series of tribes using the park. But as you go further back in time, the tribal names and the people sort of get a little more fuzzy. So multiple social groups through time have used the park.
Native Americans have been coming to and accessing resources in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem for more than 10,000 years. We have a number of prehistoric archaeological sites that date all the way back to 9,500 years before present. Prior to that, this area was highly glaciated. The archaeological record showing Native American use within Yellowstone is continuous.
The greater Yellowstone area was used for a diversity of resources for a wide range of people for a long period of time. It was used for food resources, for clothing resources from hides. It was used to acquire stone, both to make tools and to trade for other goods that could be brought back in. Obsidian cliff is one of the major North American sources of obsidian. And obsidian is a key tool stone, in part because it fractures so cleanly, it produces very sharp edges. The obsidian from Yellowstone prehistorically was connected to continental-wide trade networks. In some ways, you could sort of think of Yellowstone as being a super Walmart of resources for hunter and gatherer peoples. Yellowstone is sort of at the intersection of at least three traditional, what anthropologists call culture areas. The plains, the Great Basin, and the Northwest. So you have the potential for interactions of people coming from a variety of cultural backgrounds in that area.
You hear the term that water is life, and truly it was. A lot of the native cultures who were moving and following game would camp near a water source. Obviously, they needed this for staying alive, drinking, cooking, things like that. But it's more than just simply for physical sustenance. There's a spiritual aspect. If you look at a lot of rock art around the region, you have these water spirits that are being transported from one spot to another through the movement of water. And you look at the rock art of the Sheep Eater and Shoshone cultures, you'll see these wonderful figures, often referred to as ghost water women, and they're these giant, big blocky figures with long arms, and they were thought to be the spirits that resided in the water. These are stories that were passed down from many generations, and we have persons that are still talking about these things today, as far as people from the Crow, the Shoshone, and other cultures as well.
We've lost, by excluding Native Americans from Yellowstone, a lot of the really important traditional ecological knowledge associated with that place. They could have told you probably on any given day, looked at the snow condition and the sun and the wind direction, where the game was and what was going to happen with the water and all those sorts of things.
So some of the first Europeans to really see this country were fur trappers. So they were some of the first people to actually witness some of these great wonders like the waterfalls. I can understand how it might get a little embellished, how it might seem a little bit like a tall tale that they were known for telling.
I can tell a lot of stories through the early mountain men, which will give it more of an educational benefit, and the history of the park.
The earliest stories about these geysers and hot springs and waterfalls would not be confirmed until private and government expeditions 60 years later, culminating in Ferdinand Hayden's geological survey in 1871.
Most of those early expeditions were here a month, 6 weeks. They just didn't have time, even with the benefit of horses and mules. They just didn't spend the time. The early explorers, like many later explorers, simply couldn't cover the whole place.
But the work of those early explorers and scientists played a critical role in saving Yellowstone from the big dreams of commercial developers.
Nobody knew quite what was in that mysterious Yellowstone place, but if they could create a major destination, a tourist attraction, a national icon in a sense, they would enable their trains to be filled with passengers and commercial development and industry.
I believe there was an inflection point in history when it came to deciding what's the fate of Yellowstone.
And it was not just science, but art that led the way.
Thomas Moran was with the 1871 Hayden survey, and he painted a number of pictures, paintings, oil paintings and watercolors that mostly centered around the lower falls of the Yellowstone River.
Thomas Moran was a Philadelphia artist who had been born in England and raised in the Philadelphia area, and was apprenticed in the 1850s to a Philadelphia painter who was a landscapist. He got the chance to go to the West in 1871. When the opportunity came to travel with the Ferdinand Hayden expedition in the spring and summer of '71, he jumped at the chance. It would have provided him with new subject matter that no one had ever seen before, spectacular Western scenery that nobody ever knew about. He would be the first to present this to the country.
Albert Bierstadt was right on his heels. It became a competition as to who could exploit the wonders of Yellowstone quicker. And Thomas Moran did have the upper hand there.
He also had the photographs of William Henry Jackson, who was with him on the Hayden expedition. That gave Moran additional images as he worked on his Yellowstone paintings back in Philadelphia.
He really didn't have that much equipment. I think he had a fairly small paint box with watercolors. He didn't work in oils in the field, and some sketchbooks, and that was pretty much all he carried, unlike the photographers that had to lug around hundreds of pounds of equipment.
I wish that somebody would have filmed Moran doing the sketches from beginning to end, because his painting of course, the falls, was the reason for the park becoming a national park in the first place.
The Moran paintings and William Henry Jackson lithographs were put on display in the halls of Congress during the debate about whether to establish Yellowstone National Park. And it's believed by many that the spectacular images and the things that they showed to many folks who had never been away from the east coast of the United States were instrumental in convincing Congress to create Yellowstone National Park.
Moran did, the 1872 enormous 7 by 12 foot painting called The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, which was his first great summation of his experience in the 1871 summer expedition. He painted it in the fall and winter after the expedition and ultimately sold it to Congress for $10,000 in the month or so after the park bill had been signed. It has a kind of pride of place in his career for that reason. The painting was meant very much to be a kind of transporting of the place to the people. You know, if you can't take the people to the mountain, you take the mountain to the people. This was Moran taking Yellowstone to the people. It's clear that he was compiling this big painting back in New York using a whole array of sources. His own sketches, photographs by William Henry Jackson, his own memories, and sort of theoretical conventions about landscape painting that required things like framing devices and a secure foreground and a measured array of sort of spaces that move the viewer metaphorically into the painting. But essentially those smooth walls come from a couple of Jackson photographs that were taken not from Artist Point, but on top of the falls looking back towards Artist Point. So Moran's painting is a compilation of a series of viewpoints from around the canvas, and ultimately he's essentially inverted the view. We're looking at the canvas from the other end of the canyon, and he put the waterfall in sort of the wrong place, but it all looks right. Side by side in the field, they worked together, Moran sketching, Jackson photographing, and Moran knew back in his studio he would have access to those photographs.
I think most other artists work the same way. They'll do their sketch, they'll take a picture of what they were looking at, and that way you can work out a lot of your problems moving trees or whatever you feel like you have to do within that format. Even as we look at another one of these, a little grander scale of the canyon, you can see where Thomas Moran had used these bluffs, and they were almost like a limestone bluff that he painted white, and he had actually moved the landscape around and was able to convey a more beautiful interpretation of this view.
It wasn't because he was a bad painter, it was because in fact he was following the requirements that landscape process required. The construction of landscape paintings, which was to go out into the field and study nature as carefully as possible, but then return to the studio and compile what was called the grand impression. That was part fact, but part temperament and a part philosophical kind of intellectual interpretation of that place. Artists often do make lots of alterations to the scenes as they find them and reinterpret or alter them in their final products. It's a way of allowing some space for the viewers to find their own location within that place. His beautiful coloration kind of heightened the effects of this remarkable place. He created a sense of wonderment in people's imaginations about what this place was like, even before they ever saw it. In the painting, Moran included a number of distinctive features. They include Moran and William Henry Jackson working side by side, and then farther in the distance at the promontory is Ferdinand Hayden, along with a Native American. Hayden gestures out magnificently to the canyon, and the Indian, in fact, turns his back on the canyon. The inclusion of that figure, I think, is critical for our understanding of the role of the government and the new ownership of that place. The Native American is, symbolically at least, turning his back on that scene, and the government geologist is embracing it.
What are the falls looks like that? That's one and only falls. Maybe I will paint the lower falls later, but that's been painted so well. And whether I'll paint another one, I may after I do all these waterfalls, but I'd sure want to do it a little differently than everyone else has, but I haven't got to that point yet.
I'm a wildlife biologist, and I was here for the wolf reintroduction that started in the mid-90s and saw the growth of the population back to basically being fully restored. I think they represent that wildness that we're willing to embrace and try to preserve as more and more of our earth gets settled and developed. It's like we can still have places where wolves are howling and the predator-prey interactions occur, much like they did thousands of years ago here in Yellowstone.
And I was really fascinated about the wolves when they were first introducing the wolves into Yellowstone. Easily, I can incorporate all that into my project, introducing the wolves and the proximity, like in the painting of the Lost Falls. It was located in the same valley behind Roosevelt Lodge, and so the wolves have easy access to all of this territory up there.
Yellowstone National Park represents the centerpiece of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is one of the last relatively intact ecosystems in the lower 48. It's one of the last places that has seen relatively little commercial use. There was not mining, not significant timber, not significant grazing, as were many lands out west. The park was established early enough that it still represents generally what a temperate ecosystem was in North America. In an increasingly industrialized and an increasingly diverse nation, it is important that the American public are able to see a place like this, to visit a place that remains relatively similar to the way it was 200 years ago, 500 years ago. That's becoming increasingly rare in America.
Some of the keys to the water features in Yellowstone are the geology, the bedrock geology conditions that a lot of the streams can cut down fairly easily through the soft bedrock. You've got the hot springs boiling up. But another feature that's relatively important to the water in Yellowstone is the amount of snow it receives during the winter. So a lot of the streams, a lot of the rivers, a lot of the waterfalls are fed by spring snowmelt and runoff.
I think waterfalls can be dynamic in that they're changing a lot with the seasons over time, like Unnamed Falls behind me. I'll come back in the fall and it looks a lot different than this. In the winter, it's shrouded in ice and snow.
Yellowstone has so many unbelievable wonders. You know, the geysers and hot springs, the petrified trees, the charismatic megafauna animal show, the wildflower show, the canyon, the huge lake, the Mammoth Hot Springs. All of these features just eclipsed the waterfalls. Anywhere else that didn't have these features, the waterfalls probably would have been discovered and all named and long ago found, but it was not so in Yellowstone.
Waterfalls in Yellowstone are significant because they represent an ecosystem, a natural system that very much has a component that are waterways, streams, watersheds. They are an indicator to us of the health of the ecosystem. As much of the country grapples with drought and climate change, Yellowstone will be a touchstone, will be a place where we can hopefully see those effects, counter those effects, and the health of our watersheds and our waterways and streams is critical to monitoring how climate change is affecting this park.
As time goes on, we're concerned about the effects of climate change. Yellowstone seems to be becoming a warmer and drier place, which is of a concern if we're talking about water being the lifeblood and getting less and less of it as the years go on. I'm frankly quite concerned about that kind of interaction, for the lifeblood of the park drying up.
The caldera of Yellowstone is an ominous presence in our lives, at least in our geological time. They say it will someday erupt and cataclysmically alter our world.
The next explosion is actually 4,000 years overdue at this point. So it's kind of an interesting food for thought. When you think of this whole 2.2 million acres is essentially the top of a volcano.
Will artists be there? I'm no geologist. I have no idea how large an event that might be. I have a feeling there wouldn't be many Americans around to see it.
My concern there is being shut off in some way of completing this project. Human intrusion, sure, you worry about that. Just say that you cannot have access to these areas now. That would be my biggest concern. Through government intrusion, people, landslides, volcanic, or some unknown event that may occur. I don't think you want it to be consuming, but you have to take that as part of life in this world today, because it is ever changing. It's a huge project, and to do it right, you've got to get to the waterfalls with the right group, and everything started falling into place.
You've got to spend years hiking up canyons in difficult, areas. That's where the really good waterfalls are. And so that's what we did. We spent about a decade hunting, trying to find them.
I think art is a wonderful way to convey the feelings you get from wilderness. So I'm like a wilderness junkie, and I try to get out there as much as I possibly can. After I get back, I'm often at a loss for words. I can describe like how many miles I walked or what animals, wildlife that I saw on my trip, but I really have a hard time telling people, my wife, my family, like, what did it mean to me to be out in wilderness for that whole time I was gone? So I can see that for artists, maybe they have a way to break through that and actually convey what it feels to them.
Waterfalls, whether they're massive like Yellowstone Falls, or if it's just a little gentle spring coming out of the side of the hill, they have a very calming sense, but at the same time, you have this rush of noise.
I think the culmination of the power of water in motion is a waterfall. Suddenly it's dropped off the brink. It mixes with air, it spreads out. It's the sudden expansion of its whole form and being, just moving out, and it crashes down into often a big pool and kind of forms back together again before it flows on. It's just that ultimate expression of power in nature.
Thoreau, I think, said it best when he said that you never put your foot in the same river twice. It's always a different river. And that's a wonderful metaphor for life, for thought, for the way in which we visit the same place perhaps more than once, but we are never the same people.
And they could be a waterfall that's only a meter high to 30 meters high. It doesn't really matter. The sound, the visual effects, the breaking up of the landscape into both a soundscape and a visual scape. Waterfalls tend to focus my attention, and they focus it both on the external, but also they can sometimes focus it internally. You know, they're thoughtful places.
Philocally. Philocally means love of beauty. That's what I think waterfalls are all about for people. It's being attracted to beauty, and it just sort of gushes and flows over you, in my experience. So who can resist that?
Somehow waterfalls give a sense of that change and nuance that creates a deeper level of meaning to a landscape painting than other kinds of landscapes.
You get so deep into these projects that you totally forget about the audience that has brought you to where you are.
So I think that there's a movement away from some of the ideals that we had in the 19th century that made landscape so important as a national symbol. The landscape is still there, it's just not foregrounded quite as much. And I think perhaps that has to do with something of an ecological consciousness that people have today, an interest in wildlife generally and the preservation of wildlife.
There is just so much material that I can sift through and really come up with some great ideas to introduce these waterfalls to a larger public.
You can be inspired by this painting or this picture, but if it inspires you to go there, even better. Because once you're there, you really have all your senses engaged.
Art is such a universal, I call it a universal language that can be conveyed to any nationality. One painting can evoke so many different reactions or emotions. We all want to leave something behind. Some of us are very lucky just to leave kids. I mean, to have kids. And they are part of your legacy. This project gives me something that Moran had, Bierstadt had. They were able to use the park as part of the growth. It's a culmination of almost 45 years. And this is something that I can put everything I've learned into this project. I think creating something new, and something that comes from my experiences and my vision, there's no easy way to put it other than you just fall into what you love and try to do as best as you can.
Yellowstone Forever is proud to support Painting the Falls of Yellowstone. Yellowstone Forever is the official educational and philanthropic partner of Yellowstone National Park. Help preserve the world's first national park for generations to come. For more information, visit yellowstone.org. Additional funding provided by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. By Rocky Mountain Power, a division of Pacificor. And supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Arts Council through funding from the Wyoming State Legislature. By Black Hills Energy, improving life with energy. And by the members of Wyoming PBS. Thank you for your support.
Painting the Falls of Yellowstone is available on DVD for $30. Order online at shop.wyomingpbs.org.